Finally, it seems that there is a shot in the arm for the COVID vaccine program. 3 vaccine candidates, Moderna, Pfizer and Russia's Sputnik, have shown very encouraging results in late-stage trials. With all 3 claiming an efficacy of over 90%, there is now real hope that there will be a COVID vaccine which will be ready by early next year. But the question now is, who gets this vaccine first and how? Here is our lead story.
Hope on the horizon. 2 US drug makers have reported encouraging results from the large trial testing of coronavirus vaccines back to back. Moderna announced its jab is almost 95% effective. Pfizer and co-developer BioNTech reported 90% efficacy in their vaccine candidate. For a pandemic that has infected more than 53 million and killed more than 1 million people around the world, the bar for an effective shot is set at 50%.
So now we have 2 vaccines that are really quite effective. So I think this is a really strong step forward to where we want to be about getting control of this outbreak.
Both Moderna and Pfizer used innovative technology in designing their vaccines.
This is such a different technology. It's very different from conventional ones. The main advantage is that with this technology, with the same production process, involving the same production of RNA purification and formulation, the RNA molecule, which then translates into basically any vaccine candidate.
In layman's terms, the concept means injecting part of the coronavirus genetic code into the body, which in turn stimulates the immune system to attack should the real virus try to invade. But a factor that could complicate their future distribution, especially to low-income areas in hot climates, is their storage and availability. Both require low temperatures, minus 20 degrees Celsius for Moderna and an ultra-cold storage of minus 75 Celsius for Pfizer. Routine flu and MMR vaccines, in comparison, can be stored safely between 2 and 8 Celsius.
If the question is when will I get the vaccine, a lot depends on where I am in the world. What we are seeing on the global stage play out at the moment is vaccine nationalism. Most of the rich nations have already pre-booked huge quantities of the vaccine, which has left others with very little.
A challenge for countries like India to inoculate their large population with genetic jabs like ours. Rich countries have already cornered more than half of the promised supply of COVID-19 vaccines under development. Leftover stocks promised to nations like India, Bangladesh and Mexico.
The first agreement that we reached with the US government was for an order of $100 million. So we anticipate to be able to ship up to 20 million of those 100 million before the end of the year. So we are making product, as you know, every day and stockpiling it.
Remember, Britain's University of Oxford and Russia are among 10 other vaccine makers in the big phase 3 trials. They have also reported high degrees of efficacy. More than 50 other candidates are in earlier stages of testing. With rich countries hoarding the stockpiles already, India seems to have been ahead of the curve for having partnered in other vaccine development programs indigenously.
There are several genetic vaccines like Moderna, Pfizer, Zydus, to name a few, that are in development. And AstraZeneca, or the Oxford vaccine, are being produced in India by the Serum Institute of India. So they will likely be available to most Indians. The timelines we can look at are maybe early January 2021 for frontline workers like healthcare workers, and mid of 2021 for the general Indian population.
No room for complacency. No letting the guard down over the hopeful news. Stay masked, stay distanced, with hand hygiene till a jab becomes widely available. With Aishwarya Paliwal, Bureau Report, India Today.
Joining me on this special broadcast, I want to welcome first Dr. V.K. Paul, heads up the expert group on vaccine administration. He's the go-to man for rolling out the vaccine project pan-India and is working with the Indian government to figure out how the Indian vaccine project will be rolled out. For an international perspective on this broadcast, I'm joined by a special guest from Brown University in the United States by one of the world's leading medical experts, Dr. Ashish Jha. So welcome. I want to go across to Dr. Paul first. We now have 3 vaccine candidates that are claiming that their medical tests in phase 3 suggest that they have a 90% plus efficacy rate. When people are seeing these reports, Dr. Paul, the one and only question in everyone's mind is, what does this mean in an Indian context? By when will the first set of vaccines be rolled out in India by you and your teams? Dr. Paul.
Well, Rahul, India is very fortunate that we have a very comprehensive industrial base for vaccine manufacturing. And we also have our R&D set up, very deep R&D setup to support development of vaccine and discovery of vaccine, and also a regulatory setup which is very robust and very, very respected. These 3 ingredients put together give us a huge hope for a very timely availability of vaccine. I think you covered the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, but I think India, as you correctly said, we are ahead of the curve. We have at least 5 vaccines today that are undergoing human studies in the country. They are more likely to also be in the pipeline. The serum vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, is also being stockpiled and developed in the country and is a part of the phase 3 trials. And along with the trials in other countries, time will come when a decision can be taken if it is effective for its implementation and scale up. And this particular company has a huge capacity. It's a very, very impressive capacity. One of the biggest possibility of piling up the volume, the numbers. We also have ICMR Bharat Biotech vaccine, which has now entered phase 3. Phase 2 is complete. It's moved to phase 3 this week. We have the Cadila vaccine, which is in phase 2. Hopefully, it will move to phase 3 in the next few weeks. And we're very proud also to say that Sputnik 5 vaccine is also in human trials, starting next week at some stage. In parallel, this Russian vaccine is also being tested in phase 3 studies in other 3 or 4 other countries. So that also gives us a possibility. And more recently, Biological E has entered phase 1, phase 2 studies. It will take a little bit longer for this to move further. The point is that no other country perhaps is so fortunate that it has its own indigenous manufacturing capability, and 2 vaccines, the Bharat Biotech and Cadila, are our own vaccine. And one of them, Zydus, is a DNA technology, which is a very, very new technology. So we are fortunate. Now the point is, when is it likely that we can have a vaccine for use in Indian people? I think if we are taking an optimistic view, it is possible that in the early part of 2021, yes, it will be a reality. However, this should be matched with caution that we cannot take vaccine success for granted. As of today, despite the enthusiasm and hype, let's remember there is not a single vaccine which is licensed in any part of the country. So we remain hopeful, we are ahead of the curve, and we are making preparations should this opportunity arise in near future to be able to vaccinate a very large priority group for protection against COVID-19 in our country.
Dr. Ashish Jha, there is also the over-vaccine nationalism. Now, the European Union has finalized a deal for 300 million doses. The US, with a population of 328 million, has ordered 100 million doses with rights to acquire 500 million more. It almost seems as if they're trying to corner the market. Pfizer has said that 80% of the vaccine doses it will produce by the end of next year have already been bought out by countries that represent only 14% of the world population. And in the middle of all of this, there are concerns about how the vaccine project will be rolled out, because a lot of the effort that's happening globally is part of the Gavi Global Alliance for Vaccines. How do you see vaccine nationalism impact the rollout of the Indian vaccine?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on, Rahul. I think this is a real problem. I think vaccine nationalism is hugely problematic. This is a global pandemic, and we really need a global approach. And so the Gavi Alliance that you mentioned, there's a program called COVAX. WHO, Gavi, others have gotten together. America under President Trump has been the one major country that is not participating. I think that will change under a President Biden, where America will start, I think, becoming a member of the global community again. But the problem right now is everybody wants to vaccinate their own population first. Again, I agree with the idea that India is in a good situation because India has a lot of indigenous manufacturing capacity. In fact, is one of the major manufacturers of vaccines for the world. But right now, none of the two vaccines that are look like they're sort of the furthest ahead, Pfizer and Moderna, I don't believe either of them is going to be manufactured in India anytime super soon. We do need to sort of think about how do we ramp up production, going beyond just the Oxford vaccine to others that are in late stage, so that Indian people can start getting it sooner rather than later. I completely agree. We've got to get it to the high-risk people first. But this is going to be a very big challenge for India. I'm also just worried about countries that don't have the same level of indigenous manufacturing capacity the way India does, about what will they do and how long will it take to get people in those countries vaccinated.
Okay, let me put that question then to Dr. V.K. Paul. Dr. Paul, here's the concern that the two vaccine candidates that are actually right ahead of the curve at this moment, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer, neither of them have plans to come into India because Moderna, for example, is a biotech startup. They're looking to make their own money, earn their own valuation. Their stock prices are going up, but they're focused largely on the US and whoever else can afford them. And the same is the case with Pfizer. So where does that leave the Indian vaccines? These are the two vaccine companies that are most ahead on international parameters, and neither of them are coming to India. Is that something which is of concern to you, Dr. Paul?
Two parts. One is that for these two vaccines, if their external supplies to other countries are going to be thin or negligible for a long period of time, we have to factor that in. All nations will have to factor that in. But for India, this is hopefully not a worry, because I explained to you just now that we have our own vaccines, vaccines that are being manufactured in India, and two vaccines that are being developed in India, and therefore we are definitely in a somewhat different situation. And here I also want to emphasize that unlike other countries, the Honorable Prime Minister has clearly stated and impressed the principle that India's vaccine capacity and capability and manufacturing depth is not only for India but for the world, for the humanity. And therefore, when India would take decisions about utilizing the capacity of vaccine production in the country, this principle will be borne in mind. I'm very happy to state that already 200 million doses of the serum vaccine manufactured in India will be made available to COVAX facility. And that's a global facility. That's already a contribution which India's manufacturing enterprise is making for the world. And the same principle will be applied when other vaccines reach that stage where it is possible for the vaccine to move on to an uptake.
But can I ask you this question? And this comes from my concern and experience when we look at any big decision that's implemented. People try to do jugaad, in the typical Indian way. And the problem is that how do you ensure, Dr. Paul, that the vaccine goes first to those who need it the most? वो कहावत है ना, जिसकी लाठी उसकी भैंस. If I have the means and the wherewithal to get advance access to the vaccine, how do you ensure that all those who can afford the vaccine find some way of creating some jugaad mechanism, don't get that vaccine first, and it actually goes as per the plan written on your sheets? How will you translate your Excels, your project plan into reality without letting it be subverted because everybody is desperate to get that vaccine, sir?
I think for India, the pathway to make the vaccine available to the people at large will be based on systematic identification of priority groups. Priority group identification is to be balanced with the vaccine availability. At the start, or for some period for some time to come globally and also in our country, there is not going to be vaccine for everybody. We would not be dealing with billions of doses. Eventually, perhaps we would, and therefore, the approach will be to go for prioritized groups, and obviously, this will be a national effort in partnership with the state governments. It will be government-driven. And these priority groups are those that are required to maintain our health system resilient and strong and moving, and our frontline workers who are engaged in pandemic control. So first thing to secure is that our health system is protected and our pandemic control systems are protected. An immediate priority thereafter is to look at those people who have a high predilection for mortality, those who are more prone for death should they get COVID-19 disease. And this usually means people above a certain age, and it usually means people with comorbidities. Within these accepted principles, these are the accepted principles within the WHO system and other, there will be a way in which the identified groups will be provided the vaccine. There will be appointments for them. We will have enrolled these groups, and we will make sure that the vaccine flows only to those people. This jugaad issue will not come in our way. This will be based on high principles, and that work is already in motion.
Dr. Ashish Jha, how much of a concern is it? Because you trace your origins back to India, and I'm not just saying this about India. This could happen as much in the United States or elsewhere, where people with heft and influence will find some way of circumventing the elaborate system that Dr. Paul and all the other medical experts have rolled out and say, whatever it takes, I'll pay you money. We saw it happen in the case of demonetization, where you weren't allowed to turn your black into white. People found ways. And if I am a rich person in Delhi, Mumbai, Surat, Ahmedabad, anywhere, I will say, boss, no matter what it takes, get me that vaccine and I'll do what it takes to find some jugaad.
Yeah, I'm worried about this, Rahul. I think this is going to be a problem around the world. I think there are two ways to think about this problem. First of all, I'm worried that what's going to happen is that the wealthy countries will end up getting most of their populations vaccinated before middle income or lower income countries have had a chance to even vaccinate their high risk people. I think that would be terrible, and I would like to see a more global effort where the high risk people everywhere get vaccinated before everyone else does. So I think that kind of thing is going to happen, and I am worried about that. Within individual countries, it just depends on how strong the safeguards are. And in the US, we've seen with testing, for instance, that when testing has become in short supply, the wealthy people can get themselves tested all the time, and poor people are often having to wait long periods of time before they can get tested. And so it is absolutely critical that we don't repeat that same problem with vaccinations, and I think a lot of us are working on that in the United States. But I am from India. I know India well, and I know that, let's be honest with each other, India has always had a system where wealthy people can find their way around almost any. It'll be incumbent on government to make sure that when the supplies are limited, the neediest, the sickest, the oldest, the healthcare workers, they get vaccinated first. If you see a lot of wealthy people who are well connected getting vaccinated before everybody else, I think it will cause a real strife in the system, a real loss of faith about what the government is doing. So it's going to be critical that what Dr. Paul laid out is actually what happens and is not just a good policy on paper.
Dr. Paul, the other concern I have is about people who tell me that I don't intend to get vaccinated. I don't trust this vaccine. It takes more than a decade ordinarily to ensure that you have an efficacious vaccine. These vaccines have been made in 10 months. How do we know that there won't be long-term side effects? I get this shot and they haven't tested enough people. They've tested far fewer than they ordinarily do, and this could be problematic. So even if you look at global studies, then it's not as if everyone's saying they're okay with the vaccine. Many people are saying they don't need the vaccine, they don't take the vaccine, they're not comfortable with it, they don't trust it. How do you deal with this situation where you have a substantial number of people who simply don't have faith in the vaccine that's being given to them?
Firstly, the regulatory system that is in place for India has stood the test of time. Our vaccines are accepted the world over. More than 2/3 of the vaccines used in children globally are made in India. And therefore, once a vaccine is licensed in the country, it will be licensed for the world. It will be pre-qualified for WHO. And given our track record, I assure you that such questions will not arise, and there is no reason and no pressure whatsoever for us to go for any shortcuts. Very, very clearly, the regulatory processes, which are global standards, will be followed.
No, I'm not contesting that, sir. Dr. Paul,
no, I'm coming to the second part.
I'm saying it's not as if we don't believe your process. Of course we do, but there are people who, despite that, will say, मैं नहीं लगाऊंगा भाई, मुझे नहीं विश्वास. अब क्या करोगे?
पहली बात है कि उनको समझाना पड़ेगा कि ये जब लाइसेंस किया जा रहा है तो ये सब robustness आ चुकी. Second issue is, remember, there are always situations where there is a anti-vaccine lobby, and these people do want to take risk. People think that this is not needed. Well, I think the situation in India is likely to be other way around. There will be an overwhelming reason that people would like to go for vaccine. I think COVID-19 is a disease which has, would have changed the mindset of such people as well. I think the problem would be other way around, that there will be a large number of people who would be very keen that they should get the vaccine before even the priority groups are getting vaccine. I don't expect vaccine hesitancy to be a very significant problem in our country, given the kind of situation that COVID-19 has led to, and I think it is not a worry. Also remember, this is a vaccine to be given to adult population. We will appeal to them and explain to them why it is a good idea to take vaccine, particularly when we are going to first go for vulnerable groups with high mortality, with diabetes, old age, and so on. I think a good communication strategy, we will be able to convince people to do the right thing, and vaccine hesitancy or vaccine anti-vaccinism, so to say, should not be an important problem.
This is a big problem in the United States for certain, Dr. Jha, where you got these anti-vaxxer groups. They simply don't have faith in the vaccine. They're opposed to any kind of vaccination, not just the COVID vaccine. How prevalent do you think? I know anecdotally there are people who tell us, yeah, you seem excited about the vaccine, but actually I'm not going to get the vaccine. How prevalent do you think this trend will be? Dr. Paul's current assumption, the government's current understanding is people will be queuing up, bending over backwards to try and get the vaccine. It's not as if there'll be too many anti-vaccine people in India.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, both in the US and Europe, there is a sizable anti-vaccine movement. I see the anti-vaccine group with COVID vaccines in two buckets. There is a hardcore anti-vaccine group that's going to be hard to engage, but we have to engage them anyway and try to figure out how to get them. But they're relatively small. There is a more medium-sized group of people who are very worried, Rahul, for exactly the reasons you laid out, that vaccines usually take 5 or 10 years to develop, and this one has developed so fast. So how could we know that it is safe? And my response to them has been that the scientific integrity of the vaccine development so far has been terrific. It's been done very, very well. And there have been no corners cut. It's just gone very fast. We've put a lot of resources. The whole global community has. And we've caught some lucky breaks that the vaccine has worked better than I think many of us expected. I agree with Dr. Paul that you need a very strong communication plan. And, I plan, whenever it's my turn in the queue, I plan to get vaccinated. I plan to get my family vaccinated. And I think all of us in the public health world have to demonstrate that not only do we believe in the scientific process, but that we're willing to live with it on our own. And I think that will also help add confidence to the whole process.
I want to show our viewers a report on the status of the Indian vaccine trials, because remember, Sputnik has reached Kanpur. Trials are to start. This is the Russian vaccine. Trials are to start at Kanpur Medical College from tomorrow. India's own vaccine candidates, as Dr. Paul just mentioned, are also on track. You've got Bharat Biotech's Covaxin, which was the first Indian candidate to enter stage 3 of clinical human trials. And you've got Serum Institute in Pune saying that in about 2 weeks, like we've heard from Moderna and Pfizer, we will have the international update on the efficacy of the medicine that's currently under trials and the medicine that was originally created at Oxford University but will now be manufactured by Serum Institute in India. So here's a quick update on how the vaccine program is currently going on in India.
Russia's COVID-19 vaccine, Sputnik V, has arrived in India and trials will begin soon. This after Russian authorities claimed that the Sputnik V vaccine was 92% effective in preventing COVID-19. Dr. Reddy's will test the vaccine candidate on around 1,500 participants in a phase 2 and 3 clinical trial across at least 10 sites. The first batch of the vaccine is expected to reach Ganesh Shankar Vidyarthi Medical College in Kanpur next week. More than 180 volunteers have already registered themselves. They will be monitored over a month for the clinical assessment of the vaccine.
हमारे डॉक्टर मेडिसिन के प्रोफेसर हैं डॉक्टर सौरभ अग्रवाल और पूर्व प्रोफेसर यहाँ की नीरा अग्नोत्री वो लोग हैं उनके द्वारा ये पूरी कमेटी बनाई गई है और ये लोग बराबर टाई अप कर रहे हैं भारत सरकार से और स्टेट गवर्नमेंट से एंड जो रिसर्च लैब है रेड्डी की तरफ से जो लिस्टेड कैंडिडेट है वो डॉक्टर सौरभ अग्रवाल के द्वारा लिस्ट बन रही है जो वॉलंटियर्स हैं जिन पे परीक्षण किया जाएगा.
For the Sputnik V clinical trial in Kanpur, 2 separate wards have been developed with a dedicated research laboratory in the maternity department.
The first stock of the Sputnik V vaccine is expected to arrive here at the GSV Medical College in Kanpur by next week. The research and the clinical trial will start from next week. As per the information, Dr. Saurabh Agarwal will be heading this whole trial, and it will be done on around 200 volunteers, for which around 180 volunteers has already registered themselves.
Russia has to deliver 100 million doses of Sputnik V to India. Meanwhile, India's homegrown vaccine, Bharat Biotech-backed Covaxin, which has been witnessing unprecedented success rates in early phases of testing, has now entered phase 3 study across 17 centres in India. Phase 3 trials will see the involvement of nearly 26,000 volunteers, the largest in India so far. The trials will be done in collaboration with the Indian Council for Medical Research, or ICMR. This is the first time an Indian vaccine has reached phase 3 clinical testing stage.
5 वैक्सीन कम से कम भारत की भूमि पर आज ट्रायल में सम्मिलित हैं वेरियस फेजेस में, और उनमें से 2 जो हैं फेज 3 में हैं. उन 5 वैक्सीन में से हमें सक्सेस मिलेगी और वो इजी प्लेटफॉर्म्स हैं और उसमें डोजेज की उपलब्धता बहुत ही ज़्यादा है.
Ahmedabad-based pharmaceutical major Zydus Cadella's COVID-19 candidate vaccine, Zycov-D, is likely to enter phase 3 final stage of clinical trials by December. If all goes well, the vaccine should be ready for launch by March next year. The company has created an in-house manufacturing capacity of 100 million doses per year and has roped in a contract manufacturer to make additional capacities to make about 150 million doses a year. The Serum Institute, which is tied up with 5 developers, has so far made 40 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine in the past 2 months and aims to start manufacturing Novavax's contenders soon. It is aiming to have 100 million doses ready by December for an inoculation drive that could begin across India that same month. If all goes well, the world's best hope for enough COVID-19 vaccine could come from India. With Abhishek Mishra in Kanpur, Bureau Report, India Today.
Dr. Paul, how confident are you about this Sputnik vaccine coming from Russia, trials starting in Kanpur tomorrow? Will that be a force multiplier? How is the Niti Aayog and the Indian government viewing these vaccines which are claiming high success where the trials have happened, but now the trials will start in India? How do you view that, sir?
Well, the first part is that this is a vaccine not only under trial on the Indian soil, but importantly, there will be manufacturing by Indian company or companies. Now, that is very important because the production in India would multiply their overall production in their own country and at some other sites potentially. And the production in the country is then available in a significant way to our own people. And there will be, of course, as we said earlier, part of it available like other vaccines for the world. And therefore, I think it is a windfall in a way, because an offer came from a great friend of India that they would like to collaborate for production and tech transfer, as well as for trial. So we welcomed it wholeheartedly, and they've gone through the regulatory processes as just the same way as others have gone through. So I consider this to be a very, very positive development, and I think the word force multiplier is a good word, building on the other vaccine platforms and the vaccine production capability that India has.
How much will each of these vaccine doses cost? Is there a final decision yet? We saw this became an electoral issue, Dr. Paul, in Bihar, where the BJP had part of its manifesto that we'll roll out the vaccine for free. Then other parties started mentioning this, other governments started mentioning in other states, but we haven't heard from you or from the central government at this moment on what the price point will be. Will this vaccine be administered for free, or will you charge a certain basic amount?
Well, for the priority groups, there will be no issue in terms of money being an issue of resource availability, certainly. And it is difficult to say at this point in time what kind of a costing these companies would offer. That's exactly the process which we'll be entering, because now it's only now that there is a possibility that licensures would be sought, and the first candidate is the serum vaccine candidate. They have made available to the COVAX facility, we understand, at a $3 per dose rate, and therefore there is some sort of a benchmarking on that score. But as far as we are concerned, we are in dialogue with all the companies, including, of course, also Pfizer, and we are looking very carefully as to what their potential rates would be. But it is a little early for us to look at the kind of budget that would be required. But the Honorable Prime Minister has assured that the resources are not an issue for a vaccination program for COVID-19 in the as it unfolds.
Now, Dr. Jha, I want to ask what might seem to you to be a bit of a superficial question, but I guarantee to you that many people who are watching would have had this question. Now, you've got Moderna, you've got Pfizer, you've got Sputnik, you've got the Chinese companies making their vaccines, you've got AstraZeneca making its vaccine. People will wonder, are all vaccines alike? By which I mean, no matter what vaccine comes your way, just take what you're getting. Or are you concerned that people could start choosing that I don't fully trust the Russians? Yeah, they're claiming that they've done their trial. They may have done it, they may not have done it. There isn't enough transparency. I do trust Moderna and Pfizer more because regulations are more in order. Their declarations are more transparent. Would that happen from the perspective of those who are watching you at this moment? Would you suggest they pick and choose, try and get the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine? Or do you believe jo mila wo laga lo?
Yeah, so the way I look at this, Rahul, is first of all, we want every one of those vaccines to be successful because we need to vaccinate 6 billion people around the world, 7 billion people. So it's an enormous task. And I want every one of those vaccines to be successful. Now, the question is which one to take and how to think about this. We will have to see based on data. Right now, we've only seen data from 2 manufacturers, and even that, not full data, the Pfizer and Moderna. I haven't seen the data on Sputnik yet, and my hope is that it is successful because it will help. I'm hoping the Chinese vaccines will be successful. And my guess, but this is only a guess, is that they will be equally successful for all people, meaning you aren't going to see big differences in different populations. But it's possible that some vaccines will have been tested in older people, other vaccines will have been tested in children. And so some of that may dictate what happens. In terms of if I'm sitting in Bihar, where my family is, right, and if I'm thinking, which vaccine do I want? What I would do is not worry about, was it developed by the Russians or the Chinese? I would look at the data and I would trust the Indian regulatory authorities and ICMR and the people who are working on these things. To make sure that the regulatory kind of mechanism assures that the production is, that it's a high quality vaccine, and then the manufacturing in India is going to be high quality. So I don't want people to worry too much about picking and choosing. It may be that the data tell us that some vaccines are better for some groups than others. We just don't have that data yet.
Okay, I'm going to leave it over there. This has been a very, very insightful conversation. You've given us a lot of facts and insights, plus you've made us think about each of the issues that we took up with you. And for your time, Dr. Paul, I know that you had an extremely busy day and it took a lot of persuasion to get you to agree. So I deeply appreciate you making the effort. Dr. Jha, for agreeing to be part of this conversation, for giving it an international context. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate your time, gentlemen. Dr. Paul and Dr. Jha, two of the best experts you can hear from on that one question that's in every person's mind at this moment. I want to show you now what Dr. Harshvardhan is saying. He's the Union Health Minister. We spoke to him this afternoon. My colleague Ashok Singhal asked the Union Health Minister about when will he announce the first day from which the Indian vaccine project will be rolled out. Here is what the Union Health Minister had to say.
वैक्सीन को लेकर के डॉक्टर साहब अभी क्या स्टेज है और पहला टीका कब तक लग पाएगा?
देखिए, ये डेट देना बहुत मुश्किल है, लेकिन वैक्सीन के रिसर्च के मामले में भारत के वैज्ञानिक जो है दुनिया के वैज्ञानिकों की तरह बहुत अच्छी तरह से काम कर रहे हैं. जैसे उसके जो कामयाबी के रिजल्ट्स आएंगे तो देश के सामने उनको प्रस्तुत किया जाएगा.
पहले आपने भी मेरे को इंटरव्यू देते हुए कहा था कि अगले साल के शुरू तक वैक्सीन आ जाएगा. आज भी इस बात पे कायम है?
निश्चित रूप से अगले साल के अंदर वैक्सीन आएगा और अगले साल के शुरुआती महीनों में ही आएगा.
दिल्ली में ढंग से केसेस का बढ़ना, मौतों का आंकड़ा बढ़ना, कहाँ कमी रह गई? क्या वजह, क्या आपको लगता है कंट्रोल करने में या कुछ भांपने में स्थिति कमी रह गई है?
इसके बारे में कुछ भी किसी को ब्लेम करना ये तो मैं उचित नहीं समझता, लेकिन ये सच्चाई है कि दिल्ली के अंदर जो है जब देश में केसेस का डिक्लाइन हो रहा था तो दिल्ली में केसेस जो है वो उनका सर्ज हो रहा था. और उस नाते ये प्रोएक्टिव इंटरवेंशन जो है ये आवश्यक था, वो भारत सरकार ने किया है. और हमारे को लोगों को ये बार बार कहना है, दिल्ली के लोगों को, कि बाकी सारी चीज़ें एक तरफ हैं, लेकिन सबसे महत्वपूर्ण है कोविड एप्रोप्रिएट बिहेवियर.
आपकी पार्टी के लोग बार बार केजरीवाल को टारगेट कर रहे थे कोरोना को लेके कि ठीक से कंट्रोल नहीं की गया तमाम चीजें. तो अब आपको क्या लगता है?
मैं इसमें राजनीति में नहीं पढ़ना चाहता. कोविड को राजनीति से ऊपर रख के हमारी सोच ये है कि जितना भी हम लोगों के हित में सहायता कर सकते हैं वो हम देश की सब सरकारों की बराबर कर रहे हैं, निष्पक्षता से कर रहे हैं और उसी भावना से दिल्ली की सरकार की सेवा कर रहे हैं. दिल्ली की सरकार को सहायता कर रहे हैं, जो उनको गाइडलाइन देनी है वो गाइडलाइन दे रहे हैं. गाइडलाइन को पालन कराने के लिए जो हमें सपोर्ट देना है वो सारा का सारा हम सपोर्ट दें.
कब तक ये चीजें नियंत्रण में होगी स्थिति?
अब अगर सब चीज़ें ठीक से फॉलो होंगी तो पिछली बार भी जब केंद्र सरकार ने इंटरवीन किया था तो स्थिति नियंत्रण में आनी शुरू हो गई थी. अभी हम लोगों ने फिर से इंटरवीन किया है तो हमें पूरा उम्मीद है कि धीरे धीरे अगर ठीक से सारी चीज़ें फॉलो होंगी दिल्ली में तो स्थिति बेहतर होगी.
Here on board the Newstrack, Home Minister Amit Shah today lashed out at the Congress for entering a poll alliance with the Gupkar parties for the upcoming local elections in Jammu and Kashmir. Amit Shah dared the Congress to make its stand clear on Article 370.
Home Minister Amit Shah launched a frontal attack on the newly formed Gupkar alliance, but it is the Congress which is feeling the heat. Terming the conglomerate of political parties Jammu and Kashmir as an unholy alliance, Shah alleged the Gupkar alliance wants to bring back the era of terror and turmoil in the valley.
महबूबा मुफ्ती कहती हैं जब तक कश्मीर का झंडा नहीं आएगा तब तक भारत का तिरंगा नहीं लहराएंगे. और श्रीमान फारूक अब्दुल्ला कहते हैं कि हम 370 को वापस लाने के लिए चीन का भी सहयोग लेंगे. पाकिस्तान से तो दोनों बातचीत की बात कर ही रहे हैं.
The BJP was quick to train its gun on the Congress and asked Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi if they support the controversial statements made by the PDP and NC leaders.
The Congress party led by Srimati Sonia Gandhi and Sri Rahul Gandhi, they have also proved it that Congress party is being directed and guided by Imran Khan, ISI and Xi Jinping.
अमित शाह को कोई अधिकार नहीं है कि वो कांग्रेस से सवाल पूछे. क्योंकि यही गुपकर गठबंधन कहिए, अलायंस कहिए, गैंग कहिए, जो भी उन्होंने नाम दिया हो, उसके साथ सबसे पहले भारतीय जनता पार्टी ने अलायंस किया।
Mehbooba Mufti, who has refused to display the Indian tricolor till the Jammu and Kashmir flag is reinstated, has hit back at the Home Minister, asking if contesting elections in an alliance is an anti-national act.
आप लोग एक्चुअली आर रैटल्ड, जो हमने यहाँ के सियासी जमातों ने अपना पॉलिटिकल बैगेज एक पासे रखकर एक यूनिटी दिखाई है। आज जम्मू को आप कश्मीर के साथ लड़ाना चाह रहे हैं, हिंदू और मुसलमान को लड़ाना चाह रहे हैं।
For the first time, District Development Council elections will take place in Jammu and Kashmir starting from November 28. And already the BJP and the Gupkar alliance leaders are launching attacks and counter-attacks against each other. With just days to go to the first phase of polling, the war of words between the Saffron Party and the Gupkar alliance leaders is only going to intensify in the coming days. This is Sunil Bhatt reporting from Jammu for India Today.
This is where we wrap up the Newstrack tonight. I look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening with another action-packed and informative and insightful edition of the Newstrack. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye, good night, for your time and your trust. Thank you. Bye-bye.